All right, all right, all right, all you lovely people. I hope you had a nice quick break there and you're ready to talk about the general structure of appeals to the common good. That's what I'd like to talk about in this video. Now, to help us with all that, I want to use this analysis by Alex John London, who I will be calling Alex since he was my dissertation advisor and I know him very well. Calling him London is weird. No, he's Alex to me. And yeah, when you're a grad student, by the way, you do get to call your professors by their first names. It's pretty wild, right? It's not Professor London. No, he's just Alex. And indeed, I still have memories when I house sat for him back when I was a graduate student and I had my girlfriend come over to Alex's house, and no, don't worry, she's my wife now, so it's cool. Anyway, Jen was there with me, and she had a glass of wine, and then she ended up breaking one of Alex's wine glasses, and that was pretty embarrassing. But then when we told Alex, we found out, oh, that was a gift, a wedding present when Alex got married. I was like, God. And so I'm still mortified every time I think about that. Oh my gosh, Jen and me, because there's no way to replace that, right? We said, oh, we'll replace it, but then I thought it was a wedding present. Wonderful. Why am I talking about that? What am I talking about? Oh yeah, Alex's paper about the common good. Now Alex wrote this paper in the context of research ethics. I think it's a very fascinating little area there, about whether it's okay to violate individual rights when researching new drugs in response to an emergency. And this, I mean, even in itself, when we're in the instance of the coronavirus, we might ask ourselves, is it okay to infect certain people with the coronavirus so then we can test out different vaccines on them? And some people might think, yeah, coronavirus is a huge threat to the common good, so maybe, and we need a vaccine super quick. So maybe it's okay to do the study where we infect people and then test out stuff. This has been done before, as he mentions in the paper, with smallpox on people in the military. I won't go. It's a very interesting example. I won't go into it because the good news is, at least when it comes to coronavirus, is that to my own knowledge, no one's being infected with it in order to test vaccines. I hope that's true. But it's interesting. But I'm going to stick to the example of the Paris attacks. Again, concerning the relationship between individual rights and national security in response to, terrorism and other things like that. And so, yeah, again, we're just asking in this context, should we be expected to give up our individual rights and liberties in the name of national security? This would be an interesting discussion. Now, when it comes to making these kind of appeals to the common good, Alex's paper provides a nice outline about the general structure that all appeals to the common good will have. And he says there's three parts to what makes an appeal to the common good. First of all, you have a normative claim. Second of all, you have a triggering condition. And third, you have a practical constraint. And we'll go through what each one of these means. Right, and Alex is a good writer, so he's very clear on this. Thank you. Makes it easy for us to talk about. So go first to page 18. Scroll to the very bottom right corner of page 18, where Alex says, the normative claim is that there are circumstances in which the interests of individuals may permissibly be subordinated to the common good. Now, already lots of interesting stuff going in that little sentence there, because notice that the normative claim is assuming right from the get-go that there is a difference between the common good on the one hand, the common good, I wish I had graphics, common good, and then on the other hand, the interests of individual persons. These are not the same thing. So again, you have the common good and you have the interests of individual persons. These are thought to be separate, different things. And maybe that should make sense because the claim, of course, is that in certain situations, the common good will count for more than the individual good. So the common good will be promoted while this will be let go, at least in certain situations. So that does tell us right away that when we're talking about the common good, we have to define a few things. Of course, we have to know what's the common good, how is that different from the individual interests that might be limited in a crisis or an emergency. And of course, so then we need to know, what are these circumstances in which, the common good will trump or overrule those individual interests. So again, what's the common good? What are these individual interests? And what are the situations when the common good is going to be more important? And so with the Paris attacks, you need to be thinking about, what's the common good here? What are the individual interests involved? And then do the Paris attacks themselves constitute one of these circumstances where the common good, whatever we end up thinking that is, does the Paris attacks constitute a situation where that common good is more important than those individual interests? And so in thinking about those circumstances that this leads us to the second part about the common good that Alex wants to talk about. So this is what Alex will call a triggering condition. So we go to the top of page 19. Go to page 19 and look in the top left corner. You can see Alex says the triggering condition says that the presence of a clear and present danger to the common good constitutes a circumstance in which subordinating the interests of individuals to the common good may be permissible. So yeah, what we're saying here is that we're saying, well, if the common good can overrule individual interests, if we're saying that's allowed, then we need to be very clear about what those conditions are. If it's possible that the common good can outrule individual interests, fine, but what are those conditions? We need to understand that. And so that's, again, that's specifying the triggering condition. So with the Paris attacks, we must ask ourselves, have these terrorist attacks caused whatever that triggering condition is? Has it caused that triggering condition to occur where those terrorist attacks are a clear and present danger to the common good? So again, we're looking for a clear and present danger to the common good. That's the triggering condition, which means, common good's now going to overrule individual interests. And now if the triggering condition is actually met, we then need to ask ourselves, well, what may be then done? Because obviously we're going to want to protect the common good because there's a threat to it. What may be done in response? And so if we continue back to page 19, still up there in the top left corner, we see Alex say that there must be a practical constraint, saying that the means used to pursue or secure the common good may not themselves conflict with or subvert the common good. Now this, I hope this practical constraint makes a little sense because it seems to be clearly connected to our old friend, we haven't seen this guy in a while, the principle of consistency, right? The idea here that Alex is using with this consistency idea is that if we want to protect the common good, if our goal is to protect the common good, well, you don't protect it by destroying it or subverting it. So the practical constraint is saying, yes, protect the common good in ways that are consistent with that common good. So when it comes to the Paris attacks, how you respond to the Paris attacks themselves, that response ought to be itself consistent with whatever the common good is. And so, yeah, if we're looking at security and comparing that to individual rights and liberties, any decision that's made about, security and rights and liberties, whatever decision is made must be consistent with the common good, whatever that is. So again, 3 parts to any appeal to the common good: a normative claim, a triggering condition, and a practical constraint. And as you'll notice, we have seen how they set up these. That's why Alex likes this, is that these 3 conditions set up some parameters for the type of information we need to know when responding to perceived threats to the common good. I guess another way to say is we get some questions, so if you're looking at, that we need to answer, and those questions will gather the information we need to know. Is this a threat to the common good? And if so, how should we respond to it? And so to put this all together for those Paris attacks, because again, you're trying to think about, are these Paris attacks a threat to the common good and what should be done about it? We need to specify a few things here. So again, the normative claim looks at the Paris attacks and says, well, what's the common good here? What are the individual interests at stake? And the triggering condition then asks us, well, do the Paris attacks constitute a clear and present danger? Allow it, where we can then have that common good trump or overrule individual interests. And then finally, the practical constraint has us, consider what are the boundaries for France's response if these terrorist attacks do threaten the common good. So we get a whole bunch of questions. What's the common good? What are the individual interests? Does the attack constitute, the triggering condition? Is it a clear and present danger to the common good? And then finally, if it does constitute a clear and present danger, the practical constraint says, well, what are the boundaries? What are the limits to the response? Are there any or not? Now, I'm guessing especially when we're thinking about national security and individual rights, I suspect you guys have a lot of thoughts about it, especially if you think back to those comments I read, from that BBC transcript I gave you, again, with this talk about individual rights, national security. But before we go into all that, I'm a little hungry. So why don't you mull on those three conditions we've talked about, the practical, the normative claim, the triggering condition, the practical constraint, and about how do you think those might apply to the Paris attacks, and then have a snack while you're doing it. I'm going to have a snack, so you should too. And then when we come back, we'll talk a bit more about the common good. See you back here in a moment.